Since I bought my Nissan Skyline GTR back in March, a question I've heard over and over again is, how much power does it make? Well, 276 horsepower, right? That's what Nissan said when they released it back in 1989. But is it really true? To find out, I decided to put my Skyline on a four-wheel drive dyno. Here's what happened. Before we get started, it's important to understand why I'm questioning the official horsepower figure. Back in the 80s, the Japanese automakers entered into a gentleman's agreement. For safety reasons, they wouldn't exceed 300 horsepower. On paper. In practice, who knows? For years, there have been stories that these cars made a lot more power than they advertised. Is it true? Let's find out. To find out, I got in touch with my friends at AWE Tuning, a well-known European car tuning company located right in my backyard. They make a wide range of performance hardware like exhausts, intakes, intercoolers, and other cool stuff at a huge new facility right here in the Philadelphia suburbs. They also have a four-wheel drive dyno. And not just any dyno. This is the dyno they use for research and development of their performance parts. Now, they don't have their new dyno cell in yet, and this dyno isn't usually open to the public. But I begged and pleaded to use their dyno so I could check the Skyline's numbers. And they eventually let me, in the interest of science. So we brought the car inside and hooked it up. And then... not so fast. Before we get started, it's important to understand the difference between wheel horsepower and crank horsepower. Now, dynos measure horsepower at the car's wheels, where it's actually putting power to the ground. Manufacturers quote horsepower numbers at the crank because, well, there's more of it. The difference between wheel horsepower, which is what we'll measure today, and crank horsepower, which is where that 276 horsepower figure comes from, is usually about 15%. So what does that mean for the Skyline? Well, if it was really making 276 horsepower, factoring in a 15% drivetrain loss, we should be looking at a wheel horsepower number of about 235. So how did it do? Here's the first run. The result of the first run was 281 horsepower. 281 wheel horsepower. When you factor in the 15% drivetrain loss, that's about 323 horsepower at the crank. What? How is that possible? We decided to try a second time. The second run will surely be more reasonable, right? Printout says 281 wheel horsepower or 323 crank horsepower. Okay, third time's the charm. Horsepower rating on the third run, that would be 281 horsepower at the wheels. Yeah. Okay, so we know the dyno isn't wrong. In fact, the dyno was insanely precise, spitting out the exact same figure each time. So that begs the question, what the hell has been done to this car? To find out, I went back to Japanese Classics, the dealer who sold it to me. After all, they told me it was stock, and it looks stock, but it must be modified, right? So I called up Chris, the owner, and I told him we had dynoed the car and gotten some surprising results. Before I could even say anything, the first words out of his mouth were, let me guess, around 320? He then confirmed that my Skyline is indeed largely unmodified, save for this exhaust. But regardless of what guys with Civics at tuner meets tell you, an exhaust will not add 50 horsepower. So I think we can say once and for all just how accurate that 276 horsepower rating really is.